So I'm just trying to get set up here so I can see everyone. All right, great, thank you. We're all set. Well, welcome to the talk. My name is Frank Hayes. I'm going to give a presentation sitting down. So you can see the screen behind me. And hopefully everyone on Zoom can hear me and see the slides. If there's any questions throughout the talk, feel free just to throw something at me, raise your hand. I'm in close enough proximity. And for those on Zoom, please, I'll try to monitor the chat. So just post to the chat and we will get started. So this talk is the third talk in a great series before. And Dr. Hill gave a talk on Tarantino, and there's another talk given on the Mafia in Italian cinema. And so this is sort of rounding that out in a way where I'm going to talk a little bit about both, but really bringing it back towards artificial intelligence. So I've been in nutrition science for a relatively short period of time. Before that, my background is in protein biophysics and computational biophysics. So I'm going to talk about this AI revolution that's going on right now and how it's impacting storytelling and creativity as a process. All right. So before I get started, I have a couple disclaimers. And I have to admit, this is the first time I've ever had the first disclaimer in the talk, which was pretty interesting. But I have a few slides and a couple of quotes. Tarantino is a hard person to quote and not have a disclaimer in an academic talk. So I have that up here. And towards the end, we sort of make a little Tarantino movie. There's a couple of characters in here that are in that. I've made some AI images, and so those are intentionally not photorealistic. They're dulled down, and I've watermarked them because I don't want them shared. I doubt that Kirk wants pictures of him killing farmers in the fields, like on, okay? So those are just a couple of disclaimers. And then the objectives that we're going for with this is we're going to start just talking about creativity, the creative process, and compare what we do as humans to what computers do, the artificial creativity. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how that's impacting the creative arts, and then some pros and cons of each, and then we'll link them together, all right? So with that, I want to start with asking a general question is, what is creativity? This is always a fun question to ask and see what people say. And it almost depends on what field that they're in. I've thrown a bunch of folks up on this slide here. The folks that I see are creative individuals. And some bonus points if you can figure out what the link between those in red are up there. But what would you say is, oh, so Mr. Hills, Dr. Hills, what is it? The connection? Yeah. That's correct. So a little bit of trivia. There's 5 Nobel Prizes. There's 5 Nobel Prizes, or 6 Nobel Prizes up there, and there's 5 people. Who has 2? Marie Curie. That's right. She has 2 Nobel Prizes. So what would you describe as creativity? What is creative to you? Or just some words or some synonyms, or what do you think creativity is? Any suggestions or thoughts?
Your ideas in some kind of shape or form of other people.
Okay, that's right. And those ideas can be paintings, they can be sculpting, they can be music, they could be films, they can be science. Science is a creative process. Does creativity have to be human? Open-minded, I like that. Does creativity have to be generated by a human for it to be creative? Okay. We're going to come back to that in a little bit.
Anything that creates anything new is creative.
So you're getting, okay, so creating new is mentioned up here. So you're getting at the idea of originality. That's in the definition that I presented a little bit.
So it says that or can be created in the sense that they can solve daily problems or struggles, issues by using that.
Okay, so one suggestion was involving a brain in some way, or the absence of a brain, right? Someone that's here, maybe. All right. So this idea to create something, say you're an employee in a factory, you're making bolts. You make 1 million bolts a week. This is an AI image up here. That person doesn't exist. It's a pretty crude AI image, actually, at that. So is this person creative? If they're just making them, cranking out 1 million bolts a week, they're part of a process and a cog. Is that creative? I think most folks would generally say no, that's not. That creativity has to transcend the act of just making something in some way. Maybe originality has to be with it. There has to be some sort of element that's missing beyond just the production of a thing. So here's a great example of Vermeer. This is obviously a painter, he's from the Dutch Golden Age, was long forgotten for a couple of centuries. He had very limited number of works, 34 or so, I think 50 are known. And this is one of the most famous, Girl with a Pearl Earring. And he's become very well known for using light and composition, subtle colors, right? So a fairly limited number of works. And obviously in this instance, quantity doesn't equal quality for the bolts, and quantity doesn't necessarily equal creativity either. So there's not a volume element to it. There's something more that's missing. So if they find another way to do the job, yes. All right, so what about this dude? Anyone know who this is? One of the names up there. I was going to do a little bit of trivia. Anyone like David Bowie? Any Bowie fans? So Bowie is very interesting that he was constantly recreating himself and all these different personas. I have 3 of them up here with the White Duke and Ziggy Stardust, and close with towards the end there with Black Hat with the Goblin. He's very interesting that he was constantly creating and changing and adapting and remolding himself. So David Bowie created some of the worst music imaginable, but he also created some of the best. And he's really been influential across all different types of music, part of that. So this is an individual that usually there's not a strong argument that he wasn't creative, okay? So if you think about right now, whatever thing that you like, that you consider creative, almost always there's a human element involved in that in some way. There's someone that's involved in producing it, whether it's art, whether it's science, whether it's a painting, it's a sculpting. If you look back the course of human history, there's humans involved in that process. And now we are really at this cusp where it's changing dramatically, okay? And that's part of what we're going to talk about. So the definition of creativity for this talk, since I'm giving the talk, I get to define it. There's the original component that was mentioned. There's originality, but there's part of a human experience, emotions, or conceptual thoughts. The latter is inclusive of science. Science, I'm a scientist, so I like to include science in being creative. Being able to articulate and share, and then some intentionality and consciousness behind the creation in some way. You get this from art in a big way. The depth of the brush stroke, the density, the lighting composition, the choice of materials, all of these things play into it in terms of the composition. So the obvious question that follows on the heel of this is, can AI, artificial intelligence, create art in a similar fashion? This does not have a clear answer. So what do you think? Do you think that AI can create art?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a yes. I see another yes.
Yes.
You should just give it a call. We're going to come back to that exact point. Yes. All right. Okay. So the answer for this is hotly debated right now. It's debated more every day. I would generally say no, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to define why. It relates back to her giving the answer away again. So this whole idea that AI has the current iterations of AI, generative AI, which is really what we're seeing mostly, elements of machine learning, are using some sort of base of knowledge, of product, the training set, the data. So really, they're taking information and they're gaining something from it, but then they're making something that really is based off of that. The idea of me dressing up as Ziggy Stardust and coming in the front door, my wife, who actually is on the call here, would probably go nuts and think that I've gone bonkers, all right? So we're going to come back to this idea of the differences between artificial creativity and human creativity, because AI can create, there's no doubt about that. But how does that compare to the human elements, all right? So if AI can't create the exact same way as humans, and we're gonna show what the differences are, do the creatives care? Those that actually are generating things that we call art. So we're all probably pretty familiar with this. It's just a few months out. The 2023 strike with actors and writers. It had a pretty profound impact on Southern California. $6.5 billion worth of lost revenue, jobs lost. It was pretty extreme. It's the first time in 60 years or so that writers and actors both went on the picket lines. Now, what's interesting about this is that there was a couple of major issues associated with the negotiations. You can go back and actually look at each round of the negotiations and look at the transcripts. And two big issues. One was revenue content from online streaming, and the other was AI. ChatGPT is mentioned specifically in the Writers Guild Association negotiation documents. This is mid or late 2023. ChatGPT wasn't released until November 30th of 2022. 6 months out from ChatGPT being released. And I'm sure we all remember how much that exploded, right? And so this immediately became a big issue for writers and actors. Well, what about musicians? Just a few days ago, this hit the wire. Artist Rights Alliance, literally just a few days ago, released this open letter really directed towards AI developers. And you can see up here on the right where their position statement, what their target is that they are really asking for a moratorium on the creation of tools and models that are built off of, in large part, their creative works. I'm sure most of us use Spotify. There's a great playlist. I love to see that The Cure was on the playlist, by the way. Robert Smith was on the thing. So we all use Spotify, and you see the body, the full breadth of music that's out there. And that's a pretty big data set for training models, all right? So they came out with this and said, you know what, we want a moratorium on this because we're not giving six maybe engineers from Google's DeepMind. They left Google DeepMind late last year, went off and said, we're going to create a website for creating music. will.i.am is actually a big backer of this site. Created a lot of controversy for him again. And so what they've done is that they're saying, hey, we want you to be able to create music just by simply typing in, hey, I want to make some music. And what I want the theme to be, I want the genre and style to be. And then also like that, it kicks out some music. So I'm going to play an example for you. But know that this person singing doesn't exist. This is completely AI generated. And those on Zoom, if you don't hear the music, please post to the chat and let me know. All right, here we go. In a sea of tranquil gray, solitude in one vast leave the world so far away, like a lone space cowboy. So I ran this through Shazam, came up with nothing. Does that sound like anyone to you? It does to me. I don't really listen to them that much. On Zoom as well. If that sounded like anyone, just post who you think it sounds like. Yeah, right. There's a bit of that. What about the vocals? Stevie Nicks, very distinctive. Any country fans in here? The Dixie Chicks.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds just like the lead singer for Dixie Chicks. I didn't listen to him too much, but Rolling Stone just released an article on this website where they created some songs. You know what they found out? That the first song they created, they're like, wow, this sounds just like Tom Petty. So they went back to this company and said, What are you using to train to create this model? What are you using artists? Because this sounds just like Tom Petty to us. This is Rolling Stone. And these developers came back and said, you know what, we have filters in place to try to protect artists' rights. And we're not going to tell you what we use to train with. That's proprietary information. This is the response for all of these models, including ChatGPT. But to me, that sounds like the Dixie Chicks. We're making a Tarantino movie in a little bit. We made a theme song. That sounds just like someone else as well, right? So what does Tarantino think about computers in cinema? This is the mildest quote that I can find, sir, and I tried to blank it out a little bit, okay? This is 20 years old. This is 20 years old. You can find more recent quotes, but every third word is the F word, okay? So Tarantino's not a fan. He's very much about the human element. Makes sense. He's talked about this quite a bit, okay? So we have another artist here who's not a big fan. So can AI output be used directly in creative fields? This is a big thing in science, and the answer is no to this question. Can AI, but the answer for things like movies, copy editing, making music, you just heard, the answer is profoundly yes right now. Can AI currently replace humans in creative fields? It's happening, massive layoffs. The answer is yes. For instance, in copywriting, copy editing, those little jingles in commercials, another example. So legitimate concerns about AI use in creative fields, they went on a big strike. Was it justified, or are they just being prima donnas? Well, the answer is yes. They have very legitimate concerns, okay? So what is AI? Let's start with that and define it. Most folks tend to think artificial intelligence and they go Skynet and the Terminator, okay? We're far from that. Defense contractors, governments, robotics companies, they're certainly working on this. But most of what you hear about in terms of artificial intelligence is really some form of machine learning, okay? So artificial intelligence is where you enable computers to mimic human thought and behavior. And it can be behavior, okay? But really most of what's going on is machine learning. This is taking large data sets and assigning it to some specific task and using some sort of model in between, some sort of statistical model. So they're focused in large ways, and they're very good at predicting things. So they're good at seeing patterns and predicting, but they are voracious consumers of data. Well, fortunately for these companies, what are we? We're voracious producers of data. Yes, in a big way, all right? A subset of machine learning is something called deep learning. So these are using neural networks. And the big benefit of a deep learning approach is that you can decrease the compute power associated with it. And you develop these neural networks that are usually very specific in their tasks, and they're very targeted. But they, again, require a significant amount of data on the front end, all right? So generative AI is something that falls under this. A lot of what you hear about in terms of AI is generative AI. That includes ChatGPT. They fall under this deep learning model, right? So how much data are we producing in 2024, the world over? Digital data, any ideas? Let's simplify it. If I wanted to pack data onto CDs, everyone know what a CD is? I asked my students the other day if they had seen the movie Deliverance, because we were talking about Appalachia, and none of them had ever heard of it. So I just want to verify, okay? So CDs, 700 megabytes. If we take all the data we're producing in 2024 and put them on CDs, how many trips from the surface of the Earth to the surface of the moon could we make? How many trips? Do you think it's 10? That's a long distance. Think it's more than 100? 500? You can do the math, because there's published peer-reviewed literature that has a pretty good estimate for what we're going to create this year. 180 zettabytes. 1 zettabyte is 1 million terabytes. You do the math, that's about 850 trips between the surface of the Earth to the surface of the moon. It's a massive amount of data that we're creating, all right? Right, so what is generative artificial intelligence? This is like what ChatGPT is, taking large amounts of data and generating usually a human-like product or output in some way. Analytics plus compute equals prediction. Analytics is a model, right? Compute, lots of GPUs. Most of this is moved off the CPU onto the GPU. And then really, this is really good at predicting and making predictions based off of patterns, for instance, it sees in the data. So we can do a little experiment. The big bouncing blue, what's the next word?
Ball.
Who thinks it's ball? Who thinks it's, what about on Zoom? Make sure you're still there. Anyone think was something besides ball? Could it be velociraptor? Does that make sense? So you've done exactly what generative AI and these models are doing. You're using intuition. So you know what? Big bouncing blue. Okay, ball works. Ball's a good answer. So how does ChatGPT, for instance, do this? Well, you take the big bouncing blue. This is the prompt. That prompt is then modified in a way, and it's fed into the model. Plus the training data, the mythical training data, right? There's about 1 trillion parameters that are estimated to be in GPT-4. So you take the training model, the data, plus the prompt, and you then come up with a probabilistic choice based off of probability of different types of stats involved with this. And you come up and say, you know what, ball makes a lot of sense for being next. Well, if you are a human, you say 2 + 2 = 4, as far as it's going to be 1, 2 + 1, 2. 2 + 2 is 4. Well, we know that makes sense because of all the things on the right. Inductive, deductive reasoning, our education, all right? That makes sense to us. We can use logic in a way. But what about generative AI? 2 + 2 equals. The approach is very different. 2 + 2 equals is now the prompt. The prompt is tokenized and fed into the model, and it goes through probability, how the model is set up to say, what can I predict goes on the other side of the equal sign. It's not a mathematic problem, all right? And so they're using prediction and inference based off of its training data to come up with. Then if you put this into GPT-4, you know what it tells you? 4. But sometimes it tells you 5, okay? We call this a hallucination. In science, this is the reason why the implementation of these AI models is going really slow. But in the arts, tend to like mistakes, adds a little creative flair to it, okay? It's less of an issue. So we don't know why these hallucinations occur, but we know that the prompt design and the training data size and type play major factors. And then there is an unknown element, which even OpenAI hasn't sorted out. Microsoft hasn't sorted out. Meta hasn't sorted out. Google DeepMind hasn't sorted out, all right? So here's just a quick list of some things that are out there. And most of you have probably seen these or are familiar with them. We started a little late, so I'm trying to go speed up a little bit. All right, so the creative content from generative AI does not equal the creative content from humans. The process is different, like that math problem. Now, they both can create something that's very beautiful, like music, but the process to get there is completely different between them, okay? So what does it look like for generative AI to generate art instead of creating art? Well, in order to do that, you need to have some formula in some way. Well, what does our art, the human art, look like? Well, it turns out there's lots of formulas to what we've done and what we've created. You can look over, even in things that are very abstract. You look at a body of abstract work and you see patterns and styles. It's one of the reasons you can look at an abstract artist and you can say, you know what, I know who that is, because there's a style to it, all right? Well, we've assigned names to a lot of these different themes and styles. And so these elements like tropes and motifs and figures and symbols and themes, whether you're comparing within a work or across work, etc. So I'm going to talk about tropes, which are these recurring motifs and themes that are conveying some sort of convention across different works. And the ones I'm going to talk about, you're all probably familiar with in some way, almost all of them. Like, for instance, the damsel in distress. This is one of Disney's favorites. My favorite Disney princess right now is Moana. But that's very different than the traditional style of a Disney princess stuck in the top of a castle and the white knight comes and saves her, okay? So we're going to talk about a few of these. Michelle Pfeiffer, the girlfriend of Tony Montoya in Scarface. Starts off, everything's going really, really great, and she dives into addiction as Al Pacino's character goes worse and worse and worse until she finally realizes, I have to get out of here. She saves herself and she lives. Well, you see this going back 300 years. This is a famous one from Greek mythology, Andromeda, chained to the rocks of the coast because Poseidon is coming to destroy the coast because his nymphs were insulted about their beauty. And who comes along to save her? Perseus, who just beheaded Medusa, shows the stone head and turns to stone. So this is going back 300 years. You see the same thing, the damsel in distress. This is my favorite, probably, Tarantino character, Hans Landa. Won an Academy Award, and I think he's still the only one, right? Is he still the only one? I think he was the first, for sure. Won an Academy Award for this character. It starts off where he tells everyone, makes it clear that he is the Jew hunter. There's no doubt in the beginning of the movie that he is the antagonist. But by the end of the movie, he's the one that does the really big deed that wins the day. Because I don't want to give it away, but if someone hasn't seen it. So all through it, he's smiling and very affable and engaging. And you're like, am I rooting for this guy or not? Well, definitely he's an antagonist. He's a cunning antagonist, and he plays the part very well. Well, we see this is one of my favorite renditions of this well-known story of Judith beheading Holofernes, where she basically dresses up and ingratiates herself to the general, and then he gets drunk, goes back to the room, and she beheads him. I sent a picture of this to my wife, right, when I saw it in the museum. I promised her I'd behave. But Caravaggio has done this. There's lots of artists that have done this, but there's an interesting story not only here with the artist and her background and her history and the troubles that she had and Galileo coming and saving the day, but also the art itself was very controversial when it was released with the blood and the gore. So she represents the idea that if you look at this, you think she's the antagonist, but she's really the protagonist, right? Probably one of the strongest characters in Tarantino films is Django, in my opinion, in Django Unchained, where he starts off literally in the chain gang. And this is the idea of the quest. Starting off on a chain, he's in chains, and then by the end of the movie, he's owned it. He's fully liberated. He's riding off into the sunset with his woman after all the antagonists are basically are dead, right? So he wins the day. And the whole arc of the movie is built around that narrative of his quest. Well, this is the George and the Dragon, where St. George comes along and finds this damsel in distress, where she's being fed to the dragon that no one can kill, and he lances the dragon. And so there's all the elements of a quest with this, where there's a journey, there's a battle, there's a victory, right? There's a damsel in distress. All these elements are there. That's going back 500 years. Right? And the mentor, Vito Corleone, Don Corleone. You see this as the person that's very, very smart and runs the whole show. This is an American mafia film, which I just realized in the last talk is so different than the Italian mafia films. It was great to see. But you see this going back, and Da Vinci himself was a great mentor to individuals when he was alive. But you see the St. John the Baptist, person through Christian tradition, laid the groundwork for Jesus and was Saul as a person for salvation and enlightenment. You see in this whimsical look and pointing up, follow me. And so I had to do this. He's not here, Kirk isn't here. But if you watch watch Don's face, I morphed on Kirk. See the reference? These are Don, right? And so, another example here is the bride in Kill Bill on the hero's journey, starting with the death of her baby and a family at the wedding, all the way through. And of course, David and Goliath. This is a classic hero's journey from the shepherd to the king. Okay? So before I move on, I'm not talking about this too much because our lovely Dr. Hill here is talking about this and writing a book on this apparently. But you see the innovative use of violence, and this is common. The massacre of the innocents has been done in various forms in thousands of different ways. One of my favorite versions is by Peter Paul Rubens, shown here. And if you just look at it, I mean, for instance, the baby in the top right, with the whole arc of the baby about to be slammed to the stone, and the agony on the mom's faces. You know, where King Herod sent his soldiers out into Bethlehem. And so you see that violence has been a common narrative through human creativity in lots of ways, just like religion has. Okay? So what does all of this mean in terms of AI? Well, what you see here is the foundation of patterns. Patterns are really important for artificial intelligence. So you see lots of patterns in these different ways in which humans have invented, reinvented, applied, and sought different forms of creativity. Okay? And those patterns are ideal for AI for two big reasons here. One is there's a huge body of work. For instance, in music, we see this with auto-tune. Right now, it's a big debate. There's formulaic music that's on the pop charts, has a formula guaranteed to hit the Billboard charts. So there's a big body of data, right? And two, there's patterns. Well, this is a perfect scenario for AI, and that's what's playing out. So this convergence, one of the big concerns is that more and more artificial data, more and more artificial creativity starts creeping into the body of work that maybe is used even now for training. So we see here's a picture of someone, a famous outlaw. Anyone know who it is? Billy the Kid. It's a real picture. This is a real picture, one of the few which are known and validated. It's a real photograph, it's a real person, and he was a real cowboy in the American West. Well, here's another picture. It's a picture of my wife and I. I'm Woody and she's Jessie. Well, I am a real person. She's a real person. Well, I think so. I'll see her soon, I hope. I haven't seen her in a while. We're real people. It's a real photograph. I took the picture, but we're not real cowboys. Okay? What about this? This is our lovely Chef Fabio. Now he's feeding spaghetti to the horse as an homage to spaghetti westerns. So it's a real face, but everything else is fake. It's not real about this. It's a real person. It's an artificial photograph. It's an artificial. I don't think he's a cowboy. All right. So then what about this? Our beloved Woody. And so not a real person. Unfortunately, it'd be lovely if he was. Artificial image, artificial cowboy. Woody would probably disagree. Buzz probably wouldn't. But we see, here's this movement now, okay? So we've gone from this famous outlaw little person to Woody on the other side. A major concern that's evolving and happening in real time is that as more of this, now you see the difference in the creative process for artificial creativity compared to humans. There's been a massive explosion in art generated by artificial intelligence, music, movies, or pictures, photographs, images, drawings, writing is a big one. And so what impact is this going to have over time as this feeds back into this large body of data? Because the curation and the inclusion is still a black box. You can't get a company to say, this is what's in our training data. Adobe is actually trying it with Firefly, and they're accrediting. So there's a model that's starting to be implemented, but hasn't yet. All right, so what makes Tarantino a great writer? Is it just some black box and there'll only ever be one Tarantino? Or can we look at his body of work? 9 films, but he's written and helped direct or directed many other films. Can we look at that body of work and come up with a list and say, you know what, this is why Tarantino's great? Or is he just all over the place and it's sort of random? And the reality is that he's pretty formulaic in himself, because Tarantino is very much Tarantino. And so you can look at his body of work and you can see things that make him distinctive, such as the innovative use of violence, which is, it seems egregious and overt and offensive at times, like in like in Reservoir Dogs, my favorite Tarantino flick. But it's very much woven into the fabric of the movie. He's, by many folks, has been attributed as having an encyclopedic knowledge of film history and cinema. And there's some great videos on there where people randomly show him VHS cassette covers, and he can tell you all sorts of details about it. So he's good about mixing in different genres into his movies and integrating those and having complex characters and complex narratives, like you see in Pulp Fiction, dancing around the timeline, all right? So there's definitely aspects of Tarantino's movies that make him very, very good. But all of those elements are pretty reachable by even current AI tools. Maybe there's a reason he's really against it, right? But all of those elements are really reachable. They're attainable by different AI tools right now. Why? Because we know Tarantino's formula. It's like if you know David Bowie's formula, well, now you can create David Bowie music. But what happens if you never had the David Bowie? That's inherently part of the problem. So let's make a Tarantino flick. See if we can do it in some way, all right? So the first thing we have to do is come up with a title. And I'm going to call it the Asparagus Syndicate. Okay? Has a nice ring to it, right? And asparagus is in season, so we're going to call it the Asparagus Syndicate. So we have to have some actors for this, right? And I'm thinking, Kirk and our lovely Fabio, okay? But we can't call them Kirk and Fabio, the OUA director and OUA chef. We got to give them some other names because all of Tarantino's movies have got cool names in some way. So we're going to call them the Tuscan Riders. Kirk the Cleaner and Fabio the Butcher. Now, Kirk the Cleaner is the mentor. He's the mentor. He's the Don. Fabio the Butcher, he's the cunning antagonist. He's the person that's going to kill people. He'll smile and be nice to you, and then he'll okay? So what we have to have some sort of scene, like if we're going to do a pitch deck for a movie, we have to have some sort of scene. Well, here, now sorry, Ursula, I made him way more muscular. So here's Fabio and Kirk sharpening their knives, okay? Now, I want to tell you, I intentionally made this look very much like an AI image. Even Kirk, he's the Don here, is like cutting his fingers. This is all very intentional because I don't want this to look realistic, okay? But with just a few extra minutes at the most and changing the prompts, you can make this picture on the left look like an actual photograph and not tell any difference to it. So one term that we use for this is a deep fake. You're seeing them online right now in a big way. Pornography has always been major innovators of technology. Unfortunately, a lot of the big deep fakes that are hitting right now are porn related. Taylor Swift just had a big issue with this, all right? So you can create a whole pitch deck using current tools in a way that looks very, very realistic. But obviously, you see Fabio in the back with this, he's got these leather gloves on, this grimacing look and very muscular. And, you know, I gave Kirk a bit of a trim. He still got the gruff, I cleaned up his hair a bit. You can make these look exactly like them. And that is a concern, right? Well, every Tarantino film has music. It's bread and butter. It's part of a Tarantino film. So let's make some music with it. So here's some lyrics on the bottom left. This is for the intro credit scene. Here's some music about the Tuscan Riders, okay? So I'm gonna play it. But know that this is completely AI generated. And you know how long it took me to generate this? About 30 seconds. Zero tuning involved with this, 30 seconds.
Right. And see the Tuscan ride. I'm stolen light. If you spiral, you so free. That's what I found. And
Has a Tarantino sort of vibe to it, right? So there's a song. So all of that took about 5 minutes. That's pretty scary when you think about what you could do with putting some real effort into it. Well, of course, you have to have some dialogue. So here's some dialogue. Whenever I've interacted with Kirk, art history comes up every time. And whenever I've interacted with Fabio, he's like very animated, right? So I can incorporate that easily into the dialogue. Here's a classic Tarantino style dialogue where Kirk right away is mentioning ancient Rome. And Kirk is sarcastically frowning, smirking, rubbing his chin. So he's very emotive. And so this just took all of this, of just a few minutes. You can create an entire pitch deck for a movie really quickly. And without any type of artistic talent. You can just say, I want to be like Tarantino.
So, AI wrote this,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah. And it has a very Tarantino vibe to it, right? So an extension of this is a broader question of, I talked to Kirk and asked his permission, and I told him what I was going to do. Now I talked to Ursula, but I didn't talk to Fabio. I just went in there when he was really busy, and I waited till he was busy. I said, hey, Fabio, I want you in my talk. I gotta take your picture. He's like, oh. I took this picture and he went right back to work. Now, what does this mean? If I turn this into an actual movie or a short film of Kirk the cleaner and Fabio the butcher roaming the hills around Arezzo, killing farmers and hunting for asparagus, do you think Kirk would like this? Probably not. Now, if I monetize it and I put some adverts with it and I start making bank, is Kirk and Fabio going to want to cut of the money? They didn't do anything. I took Kirk's picture from online. I was walking by and took Fabio's picture. They did nothing. I don't have to give them any money. See, these are the discussions that are going on that are very real. They're very, very real, because it's Kirk's face. He should have some say in what that looks like, right? But this is the real discussion. It's part of the big hang up with the strikes that just happened with the actors, okay? But it's not just me doing this for fun for this class. This is an example that's making the rounds on YouTube right now of fan base for X-Men that have been fed up with X-Men because of the horrible movies. And they say, you know what? We're going to use AI. We're going to recast all of our favorite roles with actors that we want. And we're going to remake some of these movies. These are folks that are just sitting around at home. So here's some examples of what they've come up with. Some pretty interesting ones, like Mel Gibson for Wolverine. I think Sylvester Stallone as Cable is actually a good pick, myself. But what do you see about these actors? Jim Carrey as Deadpool, we ruined it. Do you notice any actors up here that sort of stand out? Heath Ledger? No, this is just yesterday. Heath Ledger is dead.
Yeah.
Is anyone else not alive on this screen? Michael Clark Duncan and Heath Ledger both passed away several years ago, both great actors. They passed away several years ago. So here's a group that's saying, you know what, we're going to use AI and we're going to bring them back into our movies. How do you feel about that? It's pretty crazy, right? But it's happened for a while. Freddie Mercury, Tupac, Christopher Reeves, it's already been done. 2023 in The Flash, Christopher Reeves makes an appearance as Superman. It's done very poorly. And for what I've read, didn't consult his kids. It's happening. What does this mean? There's some real, and so this is only going to get bigger and bigger and increasingly more real. Okay. All right. So I have 2 slides left and then we're done. So AI use in science and AV media. I'm a scientist. And the implementation of AI in our field is going relatively slowly. A big reason for that is this quantitative rigor. We want reproducibility and rigor. We do not want hallucinations. We're very focused on outcomes. We're very focused on the training data, on IP, the intellectual property. All of these things really matter, and they have to be in the peer-reviewed literature before we'll even have a conversation with you about it. As a result, it's been rather slow. Brakes have been on, which is a good thing. it's still having a major impact, like AlphaFold and then pathology, radiology, it's having a major impact, but it's been more measured. What about AV media, making films, TVs, making jingles, commercials? It is railroading into these professions in a massive way, okay? And they're concerned about these things shown in the box, but there's rapid integration. Why would I pay a musician to make a jingle? Or why would I pay Pink Floyd to borrow part of one of their songs for my commercial and vacuum cleaners when I can go to this website, give it an idea what I want, and in 30 seconds for zero cost because they released the copyright, I've got my jingle for free. That's what's happening, all right? Okay, so this is the last slide. And Katerina, I see your question, I'll get to it in a sec. So humans, we're really good at really good at seeing patterns, far better than humans. It's why it's having a major inroad in things like pathology, looking at scans of tissue samples, making determinations. Algorithms, scalability, workflow. I'm using this a bit in my teaching because it's improved some of my workflow quite a bit. Okay? Now, if these collaborate, you see what's in the center here, and that can be very good in lots of different ways, especially with creative use of data, innovative designs, all right? So there's examples of this for sure. This is very, very good when it's used as a collaborative tool. So all of these are good. The problem comes up when you have the AI taking over the human, replacing, supplanting, right? This becomes the problem, in part because we don't fully understand it yet, but also because it is replacing a lot of the creative elements, the human elements that come from us being us and having a collective experience. Eddie Vedder, the lead singer of Pearl Jam, for those of you in the back. Eddie Vedder calls this our creative conscious, right? He's a great songwriter, and he argues that AI can't create a good song because of our conscious. Our creative conscious is an essential element, like you see in Jeremy, which is one of the well-known songs from Pink Floyd, from Pearl Jam, right? So this is the big concern right now, is this idea that AI, because of the commercial interest, the financial interest, a lot of companies and businesses are jumping and saying, you know what, we're going to replace workers. We're going to replace our creatives. We're going to use AI tools. And that's a significant concern. So that part is back. All right. We started late. I rushed a little bit. I'm sorry to finish on time, but it's right at 7 because there's food down the hall. So I want to thank Fabio and Kirk for being great sports. I thought that Kirk was going to be here, but since he wasn't here, I could have cranked it up a few notches.
Yeah.
That would have been interesting to see. All right, so any questions at all? First, there's one question on Zoom. Some pieces of art are memorable because they don't follow predicted patterns and surprise the audience. And I agree with that completely. Would that be something that AI won't be able to do since it relies on patterns? And the answer is no. The answer is definitely no. I think that it's not, I'm presenting it as patterns because of, should look at this one. I present it as patterns because that's the generative AI and the foundation for these deep neural networks that's so commonly used right now, but there is not a pattern dependence as a prerequisite or a requirement for AI to produce output. And if anything, you can put mathematical formulas in and you can tell it to randomize though and create new output that can actually looks like a Jackson Pollock or a Picasso. All right, so other questions?
How much do you think it is in general AI user friendly in a sense that you should have a lot of stuff that obviously being scientists, you have also a knowledge on how to move forward in learning how to use AI. But for normal people, let's say, how much you think it is user friendly to understand how it works and literally generate something good as it is, for example.
The activation barrier, this is probably one of the bigger concerns about current implementations of AI, is that the activation barrier is almost non-existent. You do not have to know how to program, have to code. All you have to know how to do is find a browser and go to a website. Everyone right now could have a song that they probably like within 3 minutes by going to udio.com, typing in a prompt. Literally you're writing out your thought and you're getting music. That's an example. You can go to GPT-4 and you can say, you know what, I want to create an app for my phone. Can you handle the programming and the processes and integrate with this API and so forth? And it will walk you through it. So that's a big concern because there is no charge at the door in terms of I need an education or I have to know how to program or so forth. You just have to be able to load a website. So the question was, in case you didn't hear it, what's the activation barrier? How much work is involved or required to be able to use these tools? And the answer is none, really. This is a problem for academic misconduct in education because students, there's no barrier. So they can go and say, no, I'm not going to do my homework. I'm ChatGPT. And then they turn it in. Okay.
Turning it in is one part, it's certainly an issue, but what about that song that you created? Do you own the copyright on that song?
Yeah, so Dr. Hill was asking about the song that I created. Do I own the copyright? If you go to their website, they fully release the copyright. Now, that song I created for the asparagus, whatever, our movie, that song to me, I hear a lot of some crooners. For instance, Michael Bublé. I hear Bublé in that. It's not quite this side of Sinatra, maybe closer to Michael Bublé, but you hear that. This is a real concern because I now can say I own the copyright to this, but the training data clearly is all the music that's out there that those artists, 200 artists, have said that they don't agree with. They're not getting money for. You used our songs to train your model. So there's lawsuits that are ongoing right now about that. Yes.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. I have a question. Do you think it's that the law hasn't caught up yet? Because humans are suing humans for similarities between music, for instance. And the most recent example is Ed Sheeran, when he said there are literally so many notes, like I can't recreate notes, like there are only so many combinations. And he got sued. I think he won out lawsuit because his 3 notes it sounded like another song. So do you think that the laws have catch up with these AI tools and think, yeah, it's a little too similar to this song?
You know, every time I hear a question like this, I always think of Vanilla Ice and Ice Ice Baby. Ding, 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 ding. No, it's like this. Ding, 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 ding. You know, the answer is yes, absolutely. The laws have not caught up, but there are several active cases under litigation in the United States from recording artists against these large companies that are making large language models, trying to assert rights. Some of those have not gone well. For instance, with the literary components, in terms of there's some authors which have sued, and those the rulings were not in their favor. But the litigation I'm aware of for music is ongoing. So we'll see. But Rolling Stone just released an article and they said, you know what, this sounds like Tom Petty. Now, I hate Tom Petty. Sorry, my love. She's on there somewhere. I hate Tom Petty, but it sounds just like Tom Petty. And they went back and said, you know what, this sounds just like Tom Petty. That's too much to be a coincidence. And they say, sorry, black box.
Yeah.
Trust us to take the right measures to ensure that we're not infringing upon artist rights. That's the response to Rolling Stone just a few days ago. Right, do you have a question?
So how much of a concern, especially on the part of the people creating these tools, is replacement? Because at some point, we need human creation to feed the training, to feed the data. So if there's a lot of replacement, then the AI output is now the training data, and then it's just kind of like going around and around the circle. How much of that is a concern, especially for avid users and for the creators of this, of these tools?
Okay, so one of the questions is how much of a concern is it for the artist about being replaced? And I think that's predicated on the incorrect assumption that a lot of the art that's created right now is about the art. Really, it's about the business and the money. And so that's a big part. It's about the art for the artist, for sure. But really, they're signed with record labels, or they're signed with movie houses and production studios. And that is very much driven by financial decisions. And so what's happening right now is that there are active changes where the answer to the question is that they should be very concerned because they're being actively laid off in several different industries, some more than others. So it's a very real concern, but where are we going to incorporate that? Where are we going to normalize that? Because at some point we are replacing the human element, which is essential. I want the David Bowies in the mix. I want the oddities thrown into the pot and stir and see what comes out. And so we can have some of that through AI, but the current models of AI are dependent upon the training data. When that training data comes from other models and where it's coming from humans, they're dependent upon it. So as you start dumping more stuff in that's artificially generated, you have to have strong curation to prevent that, but it's getting harder and harder. I can make a picture right now of Kirk cutting his fingers off at the bench, and you would be pressed to tell it's AI generated. That's why there's talk of watermarking these images. Okay? And that hasn't been sorted out yet. There's no industry standard. All right. So I don't see any other questions here. Oh, someone's asking for a recording, and I assume that's a yes. Right. Other questions? Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you on Zoom.
Very interesting.